Children. So we're gonna learn something today. So something that's happening in the knife community that kind of doesn't sit right with me is this obsession with hardness, right? The edge retention, right? And I want to point out that it's mainly misunderstood. People don't understand what that means. People misuse it, and people focus on the wrong things when discussing hardness, toughness, all the relationship in knife steels, right? So I want to start with the recent interaction that I had online with a couple of folks. One of them was kind of notable to me because it was with Neves Knives. If you know, Neves Knives is a very popular YouTuber. He's got a great channel on YouTube, and I welcome you guys to check it out. Obviously, he doesn't need my shout out. He probably has like millions of subscribers, and he's always a gentleman online. He's an educator, and basically, look at my printout. This is the great production quality that you come to expect from this channel. You know, I have a color printer. Let that be noted. So anyway, I've posted some comments to his videos before, and a lot of times I'm very critical of him or of certain things, and he's very gentlemanly. He's very calm and collected. He's got a very gentlemanly character, very gracious, and he always responds in a concise and kind of like a kind manner to my things that I'm saying. For example, in this instance, he was talking about the Rex 121 steel, which is like probably the hardest steel right now that I know of. It's a knife steel. It's very hard. It's got a Rockwell hardness of 70 to 71. And if you guys into knives a little bit, you understand that that's pretty high up on the charts. So basically, my take on it was, I said it's the worst steel ever, microchipping like crazy. Maximet is just as bad, right? So just, you know, the hater. I'm the hater, right? But Neves Knives, he actually took the time to go into this, and he said that's a you problem. Then, especially if you sharpened it, some edges are burned, which require sharpening to get into good steel. If it's chipping, then you are not using the right steel for what you're doing. High performance edge retention steels are for cutting purposes only, in which they don't chip. Impacts lead to chipping in most cases. Different steels for different types of cutting, right? So what he said here, it's exactly the status quo of knife community. And most of you people will agree with almost everything that's said here. I'm completely disagreeing with almost everything that he's saying, and that's the point of this video. We're gonna go into a little bit of education. I did start explaining my position a little bit here. I said low toughness steels all microchip, right? So I'm like a creationist, you know, there's macroevolution, there's microevolution, but that's you know, he's talking about chipping, right? I'm talking about microchipping, which is, that's how the high toughness high edge retention knives lose their edge. They microchip. Microchip, you cannot see it with the naked eye. It's a little chips of steel that the steel is losing because it doesn't have that toughness. It cannot deform and get out of the way of its own cutting, and it just chips away slowly by slowly, and that's how you lose your edge. So that's how I started explaining this. I said the low toughness steels all microchip, that's how they cut, and that's why there's an illusion of the sharp edge that lasts longer, and that is why they're harder to sharpen, right? Because they lost all their edge. So if you're sharpening a high toughness steel, it's as easy as a couple, like let's say if it's a 420 HC steel, right? It's high toughness, and it's kind of soft, relatively speaking. And when you do a couple of runs on a ceramic honing rod, it just straightens that edge, and you're back to normal. You're back to 100%. With the high edge retention knives, when honing doesn't do anything because you microchipped away your edge, right? That's why they're harder to sharpen, because they lost that edge. It doesn't matter what kind of cuts you're making, and I truly agree, because he says here, like if you cut cardboard, right? But cardboard, that's how you microchip your edge away, because cardboard is an abrasive material, right? So it will not save a high edge retention steel from microchipping, right? So that's one interaction I had online. Shout out to Neve's Knives. This is another one. So I'm part of the Benchmade Reddit group. So recently a great looking, at least, knife came out, which is a Crooked River. Crooked River knife is beautiful in itself. I believe this is a mini Crooked River, and they just released a limited edition to 200 pieces, and you can see like a number 5 in this case. I don't know how well you guys can see all this, but basically it says limited edition, and the S90V steel. And my comments were S90V. I'm a total hater online. I'm sorry, guys. You probably think I'm all serene and zen, but basically, here's what I commented. I said S90V meh, which is like welcome to microchipping and no toughness. That's what I said. And this guy was actually, instead of like going along with my hate thing, he was very gracious. He says, I hate to be that guy, but it won't be cutting anything, right? So he's using this knife as a safe queen, some say, right? So he says, I said, in that case, it's okay. And he further replied, he said, I've never been a desk piece knife guy, but this one changes that for me. So basically he goes into this understanding that S90V is not good for any kind of cutting, right? And it's just gonna sit on his desk. He's just gonna look at it. And he understands that microchipping and chipping and all sorts of things related with low toughness is what he's getting into. He's just getting a beautiful piece of knife, and no argument for me. It's just gorgeous looking. And I looked at it, and my biggest dissatisfaction with this was the knife steel. S90V existed before the S30V. If you guys know, the S30V was the original premium steel. Basically, it was created by Crucible to deal with the shortcomings of S90V steel, which was very low on toughness, chipping, all the problems associated. However, when it comes to knives community, this is what people buy, this is what people want, and that's what the knife manufacturers, in this case it's Benchmade, put on their high-end knives, because you will pay a lot of money for this. You will not look another way. In fact, you would rather have S90V steel instead of S30V steel. Even though the S30V steel is a more modern steel, it's better in every regard that you can look at it. It might have slightly lower edge retention. And when it comes to knife community, it's all about like this balance of toughness versus edge retention. And I'm gonna venture to say that there's no such thing as edge retention anywhere in science. There is a thing called toughness, right? And that could be explained through the way materials are working and everything. The way we understand edge retention is through the hardness scales, right? So for the in a field of study called strength of materials, the very hard steels are usually measured in a Rockwell hardness scale of number C. That's not the only Rockwell hardness scale that exists. There's A, B, C, D, E, and goes on. But because they're all narrowly, they're working for narrow margins of a particular material that you're working with. For example, for copper, you better use the HRA steel, right? And for very hard steels, which is HRC of 55 to 69, the C is the preferred scale. And the limits of this scale are about 19 to 69. Basically, if it's not as hard as 19 and it's 18, then it's not recommended to use the C scale. It's better to use the B scale, but then you're going to get into higher B numbers, like 80 to 90 or something like that. And then if you're still using HRC scale for something outside of this area, it's very unreliable, because you run into limitations of this method of measuring toughness, not toughness, but the hardness of that steel. So what is this Rockwell hardness? So Rockwell was a guy, he and his brother in the 1910s, 1912, he was working and he came up with this method. Basically, it was during the Industrial Revolution, right? A long time ago, over 100 years ago, this scale was invented. Right now, we're using it to measure the hardness of knives, and it kind of works, right? But to put it in perspective, the hardness of materials is not necessarily measured in HRC. The HRC is a very narrow thing that we are using, and you have to understand that there are other things. The hardness is a spectrum of a much wider variety. And this brings me back to the Mohs scale, which I talked about in the other video. There's actually a whole video on this whole topic, but it looks like it needs more explaining. But basically, the Mohs was also a chemist or physicist, I don't exactly know, but basically he came up with this scale long ago, even before the Rockwell scale. And basically the diamond is number 10 on Mohs hardness, the talc is number 1, and everything that we know and deal with is in between, right? So there's plastic is 2.5, actually the wood is also 2.5. Copper brass is about 3, steel is 4.5, glass is 5.5, you know, and so forth, right? When we talk about Rockwell hardness versus Mohs scale, we're talking about a very narrow strip of hardness in between 405 to 5 and 5, right? It's not gonna reach 5.5 ever, and it's a little harder than 4.5. In fact, where we're talking about like this region right here, it's about a quarter unit, less than a quarter, maybe eighth of a unit of a Mohs scale, right? A very narrow thing, right, that we're dealing with. However, even though it's a very narrow thing, it can produce interesting results depending on whether we're dealing with something that's 55 versus 66. And you probably have seen all these videos, and this is going to be the crux of my video right here. So when the guys take something like that has a hardness of 55, right? So something like this is like 5 CR MOV, right? 5 CR 14 MOV, right? A very soft steel, so to speak. It's very hard steel, but the way the knife community is thinking and operating, it's it's on the softer side, right? Let's put it that way. In physics, it's called very hard steel. Okay. So if you take something like this, and you've seen those videos, there are guys who made a career out of cutting cord, and they do like, let's say like 150 cuts, 200 cuts of this, right? And then when they try to cut a paper after that, right? They take something like that, and it's like, you know, it's not, in this case, it's a sharp knife, but, you know, it's not cutting the paper anymore. So that's when they stop the test, and they say, okay, this steel did 150 cuts, right? And then they take something like M390, you know, or Magna Cut or something like that, and then they keep cutting, and they do like 800 cuts, right? With the higher edge retention. However, lower toughness steel. It's very important. Low toughness, okay? High toughness. So, and then you look at that video and you 100% conclude, oh my God, what am I doing? I have to pull out my wallet, I have to go online, and I have to order this steel, right? The high edge retention steel. However, things are not exactly how they're made to be believed. You know, it's not exactly what you think.
He's going to show you the bricks. He'll show you they got straight sides. He'll show you how they got the right shape. He showed them to you in a very special way, so that they appear to have everything a brick should have. But there's one thing he's not going to show you. When you look at the bricks at the right angle, they're as thin as this playing card. His whole case is an illusion, a magic trick.
So when you're watching all these videos, what's really going on? There's a very different way of how the steel is coping with the stresses of cutting, depending on where it is, over here or over here. And I'm gonna say that you can get the steel from 55 to 66, right? And in that very narrow edge of hardness, which is not a lot of hardness, you're losing 90% of everything that's good about this steel. You're losing the only characteristic that matters. You're losing all the toughness. And I don't understand why you would do that. Nowhere in science there's this toughness versus edge retention relationship, right? It's completely made up for the knife community. What we're dealing with in science is something that is called stress versus strain curve, right? Stress versus strain relationship, right? And I showed it in a previous video, but I'm gonna show it again. So basically, this is what's happening to materials, primarily steel. Steel is a very good candidate for everything that's happening on this graph. This graph is part of a field of science called stress of materials. This field of science was developed by the guy called Steven Timoshenko. He's a Ukrainian national who immigrated to United States, I believe, and he started doing the science. Basically, this is what the what is used right now. That's what people study when they go to university. That's what Thomas Larin studied when he was studying the knife steels and everything. However, of course, Thomas Larin wants to talk to you in a language of knives. He doesn't want to talk to you in this language, but I think it's important to understand what's happening here, right? So when you're dealing with a strain on a material, right? When you're straining the material, right? On a macro level, I can do it with my hands, right? But on a micro level, the cut itself is gonna strain the material out of alignment, right? So with the high toughness situation, you push and material pushes back, and eventually it will bend, right? So the way it's starting very linear, right? Where you push and material pushes back. That increases the stress within the material. That's why it's called strain versus stress curve. So the dependency, the relationship is very linear. So the more you strain, the more there is stress, the material pushes back. Up until here, if you stop applying strain or force, the material, even if it bends, it returns to normal. It's called elastic deformation, right? Nothing happens up to here. This is the yield point. That's where the material starts to yield, and you actually start plastic deformation, where it doesn't return to its original form. So this point right here is called the yield strength, right? And as you can see, once it starts yielding, you still have to apply more strain, but not as it kind of starts giving in, right? And at the very top of this curve, it's what is called the ultimate strength of that material, after which the material starts experiencing severe strain, and then it gives in, and eventually there's a point of fracture, right? This is what's happening with high toughness steel, right? They will allow you to yield, right? You will bend, and a fracture comes over here. With low toughness steel, the fracture may happen right here. It's not gonna come to the point of yield. It's just gonna microchip, right? And because of that, the edge remains straight longer, right? It just microchips away, but in a low toughness steels, it pushes out of the way, left and right, so it creates like this kind of curve, right? Whereas so this is the blade of a high toughness steel after a heavy use, and this is a blade of low toughness steel but high edge retention. It's just gonna chip away over here, but it's gonna remain straight. So that's what's happening. You're losing materials from your edge, and then when it's time to sharpen these back up, it's just a couple strokes of honing on this high toughness steel. But in the case of chipped blade, it's a difficult task. You have to really put an edge. You're working with the harder steel, and that edge is basically gone. So when you see someone is showing you how they did 200 cuts with this one and then 800 cuts with this one, right? So you're thinking like this one is 4 times as better at this, but that's not the case at all. So when you do 200 cuts with this one, what you do is you do 3 to 5 gentle runs on a honing rod. This is a ceramic honing rod. You do about 3 to 5 of these, like this, just the weight of the knife, you know, and this is back to normal, and you do 200 more cuts. You're not losing any material. So now after what I just did, you take that 200 cuts to 400 cuts immediately. This one can still do 800 on a single charge, right? However, after 200 more, I can do and this. So basically what I'm doing is I'm aligning this edge. That's because it's tough, it can be pushed out of the way, it retains that toughness, you retain all that material, and instead of chipping the edge, it's rolled a little bit, as they say, and it goes back to normal, right? So after I did this twice already, I can get it to 600 runs on that thing, but this one can still do 800, so I just do one more, and now I've matched this one. And all I did is I did couple of runs like this. Now, after this one has done 800 cuts, right? The high edge retention knife, very expensive knife. You guys paid top dollar for this, right? After you've done 800 runs, the edge is gone. If you do this, nothing's gonna happen. It's not gonna hone back into shape. What you need is diamond plates. You have to get to work. You have to work on it. You have to kind of get your new edge going, right? You have to then do the ceramic rod. Then you have to strop. You have to do a lot of work to pay for what you've done with 800 cuts, and not a lot of work with high toughness steel. So to me, when you go from 55 to 66, right? It's okay to do this, but not at the expense of losing all the toughness. Because what's happening is you're going to these high numbers, and there's no toughness. Okay, if you can do both, that's fine. Like the Magna Cut steel, right? Reasonable toughness, not the greatest. I wish it was greater. If a lot of people are talking to Thomas Laren and they say, oh, can you get more edge retention? Can you get more edge retention? I want to do 1,000 cuts instead of 900 cuts. I want to do 1,300 cuts. Like, why? Why do you need that? All you need is better toughness. All I'm gonna ask from Thomas Laren, if I get a chance, can you make it tougher somehow? And I don't even care about edge retention that much, because if the edge retention is not great, it's an easy fix. And by the way, it's not bad either. Everything is kind of comparable. When you go from 55 to 66, you don't understand that hardness. It's very minuscule in the grand scheme of things. It's not worth losing 90% of everything that's great about steel over these numbers, right? And let me show you what toughness means in physics, and actually in knives as well, because toughness actually exists in science. So when you look at the stress-strain curve, right? What is toughness? So actually, all this is called strength, right? This is the yield strength. This is the what it's called ultimate strength, right? However, where is toughness in this? And toughness is simply everything. I'm just gonna grab the nice pink. I know you guys like this pink. So toughness is everything under this line, right? So everything that I can cross off like this whole area in a field of study called strength of materials, this whole area is called toughness, right? So let's say if we're dealing with a really tough material, tough blade, so to speak, right? It means that it has a high strength and a lot of yield, before fracture, right? So actually the brittle materials, they may have, before they fracture, they may have a lot of strength as well. Let's say if it's a Brex 121, it requires like maybe a lot more strain, but it's really not a lot in the grand scheme of things, right? Like you watch these YouTube videos and somebody cut 200 more paracord or something, and you're like all impressed. In the grand scheme of things, no, it's not worth it. So let's say the fracture comes over here, right? For like Rex 21, it's higher than for this cheap blade, right? But in the grand scheme of things, you're still dealing with this very low hardness thing, and you're cutting materials that are much harder. Cardboard has materials inside much harder than this point in Rex or Maxamet or S90V or any kind of steel, S390, M390, I'm sorry. All this in steel is a very, very narrow thing we're dealing with, and the materials that you're coming into contact are still going to be way harder than this. Glass, clay, any kind of glue that's inside the cardboard, the paracord, anything like that, and that's what's going to chip it away. It's not going to chip it if it's high toughness, right? But if it's a high hardness, high edge retention, it's going to chip that blade away, and you're going to lose it due to the high edge retention. So to me, I always opt for higher toughness, right? And I do like edge retention, but only if you can retain that toughness, right? That's what sells me on the Magna Cut steel, right? You can see this is, if you can though, a CPM MagnaCut. What sells me on this steel is they do have high edge retention, but not at the expense of toughness. Kind of at the expense of toughness. And I wish they would actually get more toughness into this blade. I'm not happy with this toughness. It could always be better, right? And it's always, when you encounter people online, oh, I wish it was, why is it 60 to 61? It could be 63. You don't understand. There's no difference between 61 and 63. 20 cuts of the paracord, right? 20 more cuts of the paracord that you do. You're destroying 90% what's good about this steel. Why we use steel in the first place. All the great characteristics of steel you're destroying while chasing this minuscule number, which is gonna come into contact with something that's way outside of this scale. Like the clay and the glues and glass deposits and all that, they're outside of this scale. The softest glass is 96 on the Rockwell hardness scale, right? But Rockwell hardness scale is not used for the glass, right? Because it's only 19 to 69. There are different scales for glass. So anyway, that's my rant. Take it for what it is. Hopefully we did learn something. Always strive for toughness. Ask the manufacturers to put better toughness. Right now they're listening to you because you are the ones that are spending the money. They're creating these beautiful blades that are only good for sitting on someone's desk. They're not good for any real cutting.